In the 1700s, colonial taverns were far more than places to drink. They were the heart of early American society, where travelers rested, merchants traded news, politicians debated revolution, and locals gathered for warmth, food, and companionship. Inside these candle-lit taverns, long wooden tables were covered with hearty dishes that fueled everyday life in colonial America. Food served at colonial taverns was simple, filling, and designed to satisfy hard-working people. Most ingredients were locally sourced, preserved, or grown nearby. Taverns didn't offer menus like modern restaurants. Instead, everyone ate what the innkeeper had prepared that day. Yet despite the simplicity, the meals were surprisingly rich and flavorful. Breakfast at a tavern often began early. Travelers and laborers were served porridge made from cornmeal or oats, sweetened with molasses or honey when available. Fresh bread was a staple, baked daily and served warm with butter or cheese. Eggs, often fried in animal fat, were common, along with salted meats left over from dinner the night before. Lunch and supper were the main events. Taverns were famous for stews and one-pot meals that could feed many people at once. These dishes simmered for hours over open fires, blending meats, vegetables, and herbs into thick, comforting meals. Beef, pork, and mutton were the most common meats, while chicken was considered more of a luxury. Soups were served daily. Pea soup, bean soup, and meat broths thickened with bread were popular. These meals were cheap, filling, and warming, perfect for cold colonial winters. Potatoes were not yet as dominant as they would later become, so root vegetables like turnips, parsnips, onions, and carrots were heavily used. Bread was essential every tavern meal. Rye bread, brown bread, and cornbread appeared at nearly every table. Bread was often used as a plate, soaking up gravies and sauces. Leftover bread was never wasted. It was reused in puddings or thickened into soups. Here are some of the most amazing foods commonly served at colonial taverns in the 1700s. 1. Beef stew. 2. Pork and beans. 3. Cornmeal porridge. 4. Rye bread. 5. Brown bread. 6. Roast pork. 7. Mutton stew. 8. Chicken pie. 9. Pea soup. 10. Bean soup. 11. Turnips. 12. Parsnips. 13. Boiled cabbage. 14. Onions. 15. Carrots. 16. Cheese. 17. Butter. 18. Salted beef. 19. Salted pork. 20. Meat pies. 21. Cornbread. 22. Bread pudding. 23. Apple dumplings. 24. Dried fruit. 25. Pickled vegetables. Desserts were simple but satisfying. Apple-based dishes were extremely popular, as apples stored well throughout the year. Apple dumplings, baked apples, and early apple pies appeared frequently. Bread pudding made from stale bread, milk, eggs, and spices was another favorite. Colonial taverns also served food with purpose. Large portions encouraged guests to stay longer, drink more, and socialize. Meals were shared, creating a sense of community. Strangers often sat side by side, eating from the same dishes and exchanging stories. These taverns played a major role in shaping early American culture. Many political ideas, including those leading to the American Revolution, were discussed over plates of stew and bread. Food was not just nourishment, it was fuel for conversation, debate, and history itself. Colonial tavern meals remind us that even with limited ingredients and simple tools, early Americans created hearty, comforting food that brought people together. These dishes laid the foundation for many classic American comfort foods enjoyed today. Colonial taverns in the 1700s were not luxury restaurants, they were survival kitchens. Everything served had a purpose: to provide strength, warmth, and energy for people who worked with their hands and traveled long distances by foot, horse, or wagon. Meals were heavy, filling, and designed to last. One of the most fascinating aspects of tavern food was preservation. Without refrigeration, colonial cooks relied on salting, smoking, drying, and pickling. Salted pork and salted beef were everyday foods, often soaked in water before cooking to reduce saltiness. Smoked meats hung from rafters, filling taverns with rich, smoky aromas. Game meat was common in rural taverns. Venison, wild turkey, rabbit, and even squirrel were sometimes served, depending on the region. These meats were usually stewed rather than roasted, making them tender and easy to serve in large quantities. Fish was another major food source. In coastal areas, taverns served cod, herring, and shellfish. Dried cod was especially popular because it could be stored for months. Fish chowders thickened with bread or cornmeal were common evening meals. Cheese played an important role in tavern dining. It was homemade, aged in cellars, and served with bread and beer. Cheese and bread together formed one of the most basic colonial meals. Here are more amazing foods that were commonly found in colonial taverns. 1. Venison stew. 2. Wild turkey. 3. Smoked ham. 4. Dried cod. 5. Fish chowder. 6. Oyster stew. 7. Rabbit stew. 8. Game pies. 9. Meat pasties. 10. Boiled eggs. 11. Pickled onions. 12. Pickled cucumbers. 13. Salted fish. 14. Bone broth. 15. Corn fritters. 16. Johnny cakes. 17. Molasses bread. 18. Honey cakes. 19. Gingerbread. 20. Suet pudding. 21. Rice pudding. 22. Milk porridge. 23. Herbal teas. 24. Buttered biscuits. 25. Hot milk drinks. Johnny cakes were a tavern favorite, made from cornmeal, water, and fat. They were cheap, filling, and easy to prepare. Served with butter, honey, or molasses, they became a colonial comfort food. Drinks were always paired with meals. Beer was safer than water in many areas due to contamination. Ale, cider, and rum were common tavern beverages. Hot drinks like spiced cider and hot rum punch were served in winter. Tavern meals were communal. Long wooden tables for strangers to eat together. Food was passed hand to hand. Stories, gossip, and political ideas flowed as freely as ale. Women rarely owned taverns, but many ran tavern kitchens. Their cooking skills determined a tavern's reputation. A tavern with good food became famous along trade routes and attracted travelers from far away. These tavern kitchens were chaotic open flames, heavy pots, smoke-filled rooms, and constant movement. Yet from this chaos came meals that shaped early American food culture. Colonial tavern food wasn't elegant, but it was powerful. It built community, fueled labor, and supported travel and trade. These meals fed the foundations of a growing nation. The smell of stew, bread, smoke, and cider defined colonial life. Taverns were not just eating places, they were living centers of society where food, history, and human connection met every day. Not all colonial taverns were the same. While roadside inns focused on feeding tired travelers cheaply, popular taverns in large towns and port cities began offering more refined dishes. These establishments catered to merchants, politicians, and wealthy guests who expected better food and stronger drink. In busy colonial cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and Williamsburg, taverns served meals that blended English tradition with local American ingredients. Roasted meats were more common here, especially beef and pork, served with rich gravies and seasonal vegetables. These meals were heavier and more indulgent than rural tavern fare. Meat pies were especially popular. Large pies filled with beef, pork, or game meat were baked in thick crusts that acted as natural containers. The crusts weren't always eaten. Sometimes they were simply used to preserve the filling. These pies could feed many people and were easy to reheat. Here are some of the most impressive foods served in higher and colonial taverns. 1. Roast beef with gravy. 2. Roast pork with crackling. 3. Beef and ale pie. 4. Pork pie. 5. Venison pie. 6. Game bird pie. 7. Beef pudding. 8. Steak and kidney pudding. 9. Boiled ham. 10. Spiced sausages. 11. Oyster pie. 12. Oyster fritters. 13. Lobster stew. 14. Crab stew. 15. Creamed fish. 16. Buttered peas. 17. Mashed turnips. 18. Baked onions. 19. Herb stuffing. 20. Savory puddings. 21. Custard. 22. Tarts. 23. Fruit pies. 24. Sugar cakes. 25. Spiced biscuits. Oysters were extremely cheap in the 1700s and widely available along the Atlantic coast. Tavern guests enjoyed oyster stews, fried oysters, and oyster pies. Lobster, now considered a luxury, was once so common it was considered poor man's food. Spices played an important role. Nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and ginger were imported and used sparingly, adding warmth and depth to tavern dishes. These spices made simple ingredients feel special. Alcohol remained central to tavern culture. Meals were often cooked with ale, cider, or rum. Stews simmered in beer were rich and filling. Rum punch was a popular companion to meals, especially in the evening. Taverns also hosted formal dinners and banquets. Political meetings, merchant deals, and celebrations were marked by elaborate meals. In some cases, taverns served multi-course dinners with soups, roasted meats, puddings, and desserts. Women in the kitchen became known for signature dishes. A tavern cook's reputation could attract travelers from miles away. Good food meant business success. These refined tavern meals influenced early American restaurants. Many dishes evolved into classics still eaten today. Meat pies became pot pies, puddings became desserts, and stews became staples of American comfort food. Colonial tavern dining shows how American cuisine grew from humble beginnings into something more complex. It balanced necessity with enjoyment, survival with celebration. Food at these taverns wasn't just nourishment, it was status, culture, and connection. Each meal reflected a society finding its identity one plate at a time. Colonial taverns were more than places to eat and drink. They were social hubs where news spread, deals were made, and revolutions quietly brewed. Food played a central role in keeping guests satisfied for hours, sometimes entire days. Because refrigeration didn't exist, tavern menus were built around foods that could last, be reheated, or fed to large crowds. One of the most common cooking methods was boiling. Large iron pots set over open fires all day, filled with soups, stews, and broths. These dishes changed constantly as new ingredients were added throughout the day. A stew might begin with beef bones in the morning and end with vegetables, barley, and leftover meat by night. Bread was essential. Taverns baked dense loaves made from rye, cornmeal, or wheat. These breads were filling and durable, often served stale on purpose so they could soak up stews and gravies. Cornbread and johnny cakes were especially common in southern colonies. Here are 25 everyday but fascinating foods frequently found in colonial taverns. 1. Beef stew. 2. Mutton stew. 3. Barley soup. 4. Pea soup. 5. Chicken broth. 6. Boiled beef. 7. Boiled pork. 8. Salted fish. 9. Smoked ham. 10. Cornbread. 11. Rye bread. 12. Johnny cakes. 13. Hard biscuits. 14. Buttered cabbage. 15. Stewed carrots. 16. Turnip mash. 17. Bean porridge. 18. Lentil stew. 19. Onion soup. 20. Cheese curds. 21. Pickled vegetables. 22. Salted eggs. 23. Apple compote. 24. Dried fruit mix. 25. Molasses pudding. Salt was the most important ingredient in tavern kitchens. Meat and fish were heavily salted to preserve them for weeks or months. While this made food tougher and saltier, it ensured survival. Guests expected strong flavors and washed them down with ale or cider. Cheese was another staple. Hard cheeses aged well and added protein to meals. They were often served with bread as a simple lunch or late-night snack. Pickled vegetables added acidity and balanced otherwise heavy meals. Desserts were simple but satisfying. Molasses, imported from the Caribbean, sweetened many puddings and cakes. Apples were used constantly baked, stewed, or dried because they stored well through winter. Portion sizes were large. Taverns served meals family style, with shared bowls and plates. Etiquette was loose. Hands were used often, and knives were personal items carried by guests. Meals were timed around daylight. Breakfast was early and heavy. Dinner was the largest meal of the day, eaten in the afternoon. Supper was lighter, often leftovers or bread with cheese. Tavern food was deeply regional. Northern taverns relied more on fish and dairy, while southern taverns favored corn, pork, and stews. Frontier taverns served whatever could be hunted or traded locally. Despite their rough reputation, taverns helped shape American food culture. They introduced travelers to new flavors and cooking styles. Recipes spread from colony to colony, slowly forming a shared cuisine. Every bowl of stew and slice of bread tells a story of survival, adaptation, and community. Colonial tavern food was simple, hearty, and unforgettable. By the late 1700s, colonial taverns had become symbols of early American life. They were places where strangers became neighbors, deals were sealed over shared meals, and history quietly unfolded at wooden tables stained by ale and stew. The food served in these taverns reflects the realities, struggles, and traditions of a growing nation. Tavern meals were built around availability and endurance. Cooks prepared food that could feed many people, survive long hours over fire, and provide enough energy for laborers, travelers, and soldiers. Simplicity ruled, but flavor came from patience, smoke, fat, and seasoning. Some tavern food shocked modern diners. Dishes made from organ meats, liver, heart, kidneys, and brains were common. Nothing was wasted. These cuts were often chopped into stews or baked into pies. Blood puddings and meat sausages were prized for their richness and nutrition. Here are 25 fascinating and often forgotten foods served at colonial taverns. 1. Liver stew. 2. Kidney pudding. 3. Blood pudding. 4. Head cheese. 5. Boiled ox tongue. 6. Calf's foot jelly. 7. Bone marrow spread. 8. Brain fritters. 9. Tripe stew. 10. Fatback pork. 11. Salt pork slices. 12. Lard fried bread. 13. Dripping gravy. 14. Hardtack. 15. Ship's biscuit. 16. Brown ale stew. 17. Rum glazed meat. 18. Spiced cider apples. 19. Roasted chestnuts. 20. Nut porridge. 21. Honey pudding. 22. Treacle tart. 23. Plum duff. 24. Seed cakes. 25. Spiced wine cakes. Alcohol and food were inseparable. Many dishes were cooked with beer, rum, or cider. Alcohol preserved food, added calories, and masked strong flavors. Children and adults alike drank small amounts of weak beer or cider daily. Taverns followed strict but unwritten rules. Guests paid for meals by the day or by the week. Complaints about food were rare, choices were limited, and hunger was real. Eating was about sustenance, not preference. Despite the rough conditions, taverns fostered creativity. Cooks learned to stretch ingredients, layer flavors, and reuse leftovers. A roast one night became stew the next day. Bones became broth. Bread became pudding. These cooking techniques influenced future American kitchens. The habit of slow cooking, comfort stews, and baked puddings carried into farmhouses, frontier cabins, and later city homes. Colonial tavern food also played a role in politics. Revolutionary meetings took place over meals. Soldiers were recruited at tavern tables. Plans were whispered between bites of bread and meat. When we look back at colonial tavern food, we see more than strange recipes, we see resilience. These meals fed a nation before it fully existed. They supported travel, trade, labor, and revolution. From smoky stews to molasses sweets, tavern food tells the story of early America in the most human way possible. It reminds us that history was lived between meals, and that sometimes the most amazing stories begin at the table.